Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Cindy Klement, and I am so honored to say that it has been 2 full years tonight of my presenting these bi-monthly webinars for Touchstone Essentials. And folks, really my passion is in education, and you Touchstone Essential family members of mine have been so gracious in supporting my webinars. And working around my schedule, really. But isn't that the beauty of being a member of Touchstone Essentials? I mean, we've got quality products. You get to work where you want, when you want. So again, thank you so much for joining tonight and for welcoming me twice a month into your homes or offices or wherever you are. Craig will not be joining us tonight, but we're going to be taking a look at another topic from my book. And this time we're going to be talking about PCBs. So let's get started here. PCBs are a class of compounds that were introduced in the late 1920s, and PCB stands for polychlorinated biphenyls, as it says there right on the sign. Of the approximately 2.4 trillion pounds of this chemical produced worldwide, about 30% of that, unfortunately, has been discharged into our environment. So, my goodness, we've got about 400 billion pounds that are either waiting for disposal or are still in use. And PCBs, folks, are considered a very serious and persistent environmental pollutant. Between 1929 and 1971, PCBs were manufactured in Anniston, Alabama. Now, the Monsanto company, and we all know who that is, they purchased the facility around 1935. And then after PCBs were first detected in human blood around 1970, the EPA estimates that about 1.4 billion pounds of PCBs were produced before this plant was closed. Now, the court documents indicate that the liquid waste that was discharged from the plant containing PCBs made its way to something called the Snow Creek, which I'm sure if you're in that area, you know all about that. But it made its way to the Snow Creek at a rate of 250 pounds per day, with an additional contribution to the air emissions, which was calculated at about 2 pounds per day. Now, in addition to the nearly 1 million pounds of PCB containing waste that was deposited into uncapped landfills, and by the way, they finally capped them in the 1980s, and this is all southwest of Anniston in that manufacturing facility. Now, because of the persistent PCB contamination in Anniston, Alabama, locally raised chickens and hogs showed an extremely high level of PCB contamination, as did the fish, of course, in the rivers. And this led to a no consumption fish advisory that was set in place in 1990, and it's still in effect today. So some of these pollutants, folks, they just don't go away, and others, they degrade over time. Now, PCBs are released into the environment in a number of ways. They're released through waste incinerators for hospitals and solid waste. And interestingly, they also exist in machinery that was built prior to 1977. And when those devices get hot during operation, the PCBs enter the air. Now, they can also enter the environment through electrical transformers, the disposal of electrical equipment, and leakage from the stockpiles of old industrial lubricants that contain those PCBs. Now, unfortunately, PCB out of 275 chemicals on the US EPA's, it's called the Priority List of Hazard Substances, PCBs rank number 5 out of 275 chemicals, and they've got about 1.6 million pounds released and disposed of in 2007 alone. Now, we talk about the half-life. The half-life is defined as the time required for half of the compound or the chemical to degrade. So PCB 153, the half-life of that chemical can exceed 100 years on the seafloor. Now, the half-lives of PCBs in the human body, they widely vary by the type, and it can range anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20 years. Now, PCB 105, there are a number of PCBs. PCB 105 has the shortest half-life, but PCB 180 has its elimination rate of about 20 years in our human body. Now, again, the higher the number associated with that PCB, the more persistent it is in both the environment and in the body. Now, the amount that remains after that half-life period has gone by, it's always going to depend on how much of that chemical was originally involved in that exposure. Now, regarding dietary exposure, we talked about the fish in Anniston, Alabama, but the consumption of foods from animal origins actually account for approximately 80 to 95% of our own body burden. With cod and liver and fish, they are the largest dietary contributors, followed by butter and dairy products, vegetable oils, eggs, and meat. So again, we always tend to promote that plant-based diet, and there are a number of reasons that we do that. Now, here's an interesting thing to learn. Farmed fish, of course, are closer to the shore water, and that is where the first deposition for the runoff sources of these chemicals are to that land pollution. Now, the Environmental Working Group, they examined farmed salmon that they purchased in Washington, D.C., Portland, Oregon, as well as San Francisco. And the PCB levels in all farmed fish samples studied were greater than 5 times that which was found in the samples of wild salmon. So again, it gets into our soil, the runoff gets into the water, and now we've got the fish that are living in that water. There are Canadian advisories for the Great Lakes. They're sport fishing because of PCB contamination. One of the Great Lakes is Lake Erie, and the salmon there show early sexual development as well as a loss of secondary male sexual characteristics. So salmon that has been introduced to these waters in the Great Lakes, the bigger lakes, have also shown enlarged thyroid glands. So PCBs are endocrine disrupting, hormonal disrupting chemicals. And unfortunately, they really travel long distances because they're persistent. So they're found in Arctic snow, which is far from where they were released. They travel in the atmosphere, they travel in the vapor, and they settle as dust after being deposited through rain or snow. And then following that deposition onto the grass or the feed or the produce, it's then eaten by the animals and eaten by, of course, humans. Now, in 1995, the city of Chicago was the first major site in the United States to start testing air levels of PCBs. And what they found were that the concentrations measured 50 to 60 times higher in summer than in winter. And I don't know if you've noticed, if you pay any attention at all to the air quality in the summer, But what happens is the heat kind of holds it down here. And those crisp, clear blue sky days, the chemicals tend to stay higher. And so these PCBs, by the way, are stored in fat. And so we have a very fatty brain. So this lipid or this fat-rich brain also attracts these chemicals for storage, as well as in our visceral fat and our body fat. Now, unfortunately, these PCB compounds have been elevated in Parkinson's disease patients. And what happens then is it results in that reduction of dopamine, which in turn then affects their motor movement and their cognitive thinking. But PCBs also interfere with the uptake of other neurotransmitters like serotonin. Now, PCBs, as I mentioned, they are hormone or endocrine disrupting, and they're structurally similar to hormones. So PCBs then mimic natural hormones, but then they alter the natural functioning of our human hormones in the body. And these endocrine disruptors, or EDs as we call them, they can affect our offspring as well as even subsequent generations. So not just the children that we birth, but generations that follow. And there are other chemicals that are thought to affect multiple generations, including things like cocaine or pesticides or even BPA. Now, PCBs have been associated with an impaired production and development of the mature sperm. They've been associated with decreased thyroid hormone levels, as well as an alteration of reproductive hormone levels. They've been associated with ovarian dysfunction, as well as infertility, and endometriosis or abnormal menstrual bleeding. And there's extremely strong evidence that suggests that prenatal exposure to chemicals that are endocrine disrupting, so things that are called estrogenic or anti-androgenic, the androgens are the male hormones. These endocrine disruptors then interfere with reproductive development in the offspring, especially the males. So there's a concern that's growing in the scientific community, even over low-level prenatal exposure to these endocrine disruptors. And again, can lead to infertility in both sexes. But it also can cause an early onset of puberty in females, and yet a delay in male puberty. So these are not our friend, these chemicals. Because they have these estrogenic properties, they are causing an imbalance in women in our estrogen levels. But there are also too many, and estrogens predominantly a female hormone. But what happens then if the male gets too much of this, it's anti-androgenic. So they're really disrupting our programming in early development in human beings. In 2009, which is a long time ago, the Endocrine Society indicated that endocrine disruptors create a significant concern for public health. And these PCBs, they are transferred through the placenta to the developing fetus. And of course, prenatal exposure is a very critical window of exposure. And yet, PCB 153 is found in 95% of maternal blood samples in multiple studies. And this increased prenatal concentration of PCB 153 is significantly associated with lower what we call psychomotor scores in infants, and it shows harmful effects on early brain development. So you can see how powerful it is for you to have products that can help to detoxify. And as I've always maintained, we have got to detoxify these young people before they conceive, both men and women. Get the bodies cleaned out. Don't pass this stuff on to this next generation or the subsequent generation. That really is a very strong passion of mine. Unfortunately, breastfeeding also increases level. Think about it. These are fat-loving chemicals. They like to store in fat, and the fat in milk and mother's milk carries these compounds to the developing infants, and it results in children's blood levels that remain high in the first years of life when they're nursing. But here's what's so fascinating. Do you know that the female body detoxifies? Why? I don't know, but it detoxifies into the baby. As the woman is pregnant, her chemicals can enter into the body. In fact, they have shown that the maternal body burden can decrease up to 25% during pregnancy and long periods of breastfeeding. But think about this, the PCBs are then concentrated into a much smaller body of an infant, and the diet is exclusively dependent on milk. So it's estimated that about 20% of the prevalence of ADHD today is associated with exposure to various toxic substances in early development. And the researchers have found that PCBs can inhibit, again, that neural uptake of serotonin and GABA and glutamate in the brain. And then what does that do? That affects social behavior, mood, sleep, and appetite. They show that in the studies, they have shown that preschool children with prenatal exposure to PCB 153, they exhibit greater states of anxiety and unhappiness in their life. And the effects, by the way, of this PCB exposure during that pre and postnatal period may not even appear until many, many years later. There was a study that they did with 207 Dutch 3.5-year-old children, and they showed in that study that prenatal exposure to PCBs was associated with a greater risk of recurrent ear infections, chickenpox, and other childhood diseases. So the research also shows that PCBs can lower the circulating level of vitamin D3 in humans. So we think about that and we say, well, we know vitamin D3 is good for our immune system. So if PCBs are lowering that, is that why all of a sudden everyone is vitamin D deficient? And so we really have to consider, again, I'm really adamant about this, detox the younger folks, detox them. Now, finally, one other point is that PCBs are considered what are called obesogens. And obesogens are defined as chemicals that act directly on fat cells to increase their number and storage, and they do so by altering the mechanisms that regulate the appetite, satiety, as well as metabolic rate. And they find increasing evidence correlating this PCB exposure with not only obesity, but type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and cardiovascular disease as well. So PCBs are classified by this big agency. It's an international agency, and it's called the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And they classify the different chemicals into groups. PCBs are in a group 1, which is a known human carcinogen. And it does have the potential to also be classified as an estrogen receptor antagonist, an immunotoxicant, a serotonin inhibitor, and a neurotoxicant. So I want to talk about some, now that you know the horrible story about them, I'm going to talk about some action steps that we can take to avoid PCBs. The cornucopia, you can see it at the top there. The Cornucopia Institute is one of your very good friends from here on out, I'm telling you. They're continuously giving us something called scorecards. And if you look at the link on the slide, you can go to that link, and this website, it's a nonprofit organization. they have what we call scorecards. So in other words, they will tell you out of 100 different brands of eggs, which ones are the best in your area. Out of all the dairy, the milk, the yogurt, all of that kind of stuff, which is the best, the cleanest, not the best tasting, but the cleanest as far as toxicants. They've got scorecards on beef, on poultry, on yogurt, cottage cheese. They have a number of these cards. So when you are shopping for those, and they also have an app, but you can look at this prior and you can say, okay, well, I'm going to get this kind of egg because I'm from New Jersey or whatever, and this is the best egg for me. So cornucopia is going to help you because, again, these PCBs are really found much more often than anything in fatty foods, and animal products and vegetable oils are fatty foods. So if we limit the amount of animal products that are consumed or get better ones, that's a good first step. Also, removing the skin of the fish prior to cooking, or trimming the fat from the meats, or even selecting the lowest fat option in dairy products, because again, these contaminants love fat and they store there. Now, if you're buying fish at a counter, a store with a counter, you can ask them to remove that skin prior to packaging, because that's where all the fat is. That's how they keep the water out. It's a very fatty layer on the outside of their bodies, and that really, that's where the fat is found. We can refrain from cooking in lard and butter and bacon grease, and they suggest that we broil the fish and we broil the meat so that the fat drips away. Now, there's another resource, and this is the EPA. It's really important that if you're going to be eating fish, and again, fish is, it's protein, it's essential fatty acids. There are some good things about it, but we've got to get the best fish that we can. And there are fish advisories that the EPA has on their website. And here again, the link is shown, because seafood, again, is a major contributor to the dietary intake of PCBs. And this website, this fish advisory area of the EPA in general, it's going to show you the chemicals in the fish, in the river, in the lake near your home. It's really an extensive website. And of course, they do want folks to limit consumption to 5 ounces of fish per month while pregnant and nursing, and up to 5 years prior to conceiving. So you can see the importance, once again, of just detoxing and using these action steps to avoid further exposure. Oh, by the way, PCBs have also been detected in fish oil supplements, so beware of that as well. So as I said, PCBs are stored in fat, and women have a higher percentage of body fat than most men. And the higher body fat percentages are linked to those longer half-lives of PCB. So we need to try and reduce our body fat. And of course, Touchstone Essential products can certainly help with that. So who do you know that you can help, that you can share this information with, that's pregnant or nursing or planning a family? Who do you know that's overweight? Who do you know that consumes food of an animal origin or uses vegetable oils? I mean, by the end of this, we'll all say, oh, it's everybody, right? Who do you know that uses electrical devices that were manufactured, that heat up, that were manufactured prior to 1977? Who do you know that lives in Anniston, Alabama? Who do you know that lives anywhere on the planet? Really, we need to detoxify everyone, and we can help with Touchstone Essentials products. So we're going to start by looking at how organic superfiber can help. We can support detoxification with this product. The organic fiber, the prebiotics, and the probiotics are going to support a healthy gut microbiome. And I know that you know that gut microbiome and our endocannabinoid system, they're all so important to get us back to homeostasis and to get us back to that point where we're feeling good and our body is working as it was intended. The organic superfiber has those plant-based enzymes that are going to promote that healthy digestion. And with its insoluble fiber, that's going to keep that digestive tract moving, so the person will be more regular. And of course, fiber speeds up digestion and helps to kind of scrub those toxicants from the digestive tract. And it has those organic herbs and superfoods that are going to provide the antioxidants that are going to fight the free radicals that are formed by being exposed to these contaminants. Now, fulvic acid is a component of what's called humus, and that's that highly nutritious layer of the earth. And it's that highly nutritious layer of the earth that feeds the plants and ensures that they grow really strong and healthy. And of course, over the past several decades, everyone has learned a lot more about how fulvic acids found in dirt can actually improve our human gut health and therefore as well our immune functioning. So these compounds found in fulvic acid, just like the soil, help to nourish our digestive system and boost the ability of good bacteria to repopulate and form a healthy gut microbiome environment. And that, of course, is going to improve our gut function. And the fulvic acid binds with heavy metals. And of course, that process is called chelation. And then it converts them into an inactive compound, which can then be eliminated through those normal excretory processes in our body. So as a natural form of chelation therapy, fulvic acid is capable of binding to and breaking down the toxins and the metals that enter our body through our food supply, through our water, through prescription medications, household products, air pollution. Of course, the list goes on. But this allows it to act as a detoxification agent. And once it becomes reactive with compounds, fulvic acid helps them become more soluble in water, which means that they're going to be carried out of our body much more easily. And fulvic acid is highly effective at neutralizing and detoxifying these harmful toxicants and pollutions. But remember, it's recommended that you use fulvic acid with filtered water, not tap water, because chlorine is going to interact with the humic acids in the fulvic acid in a negative way. So we always want to use filtered water if possible. And it's a really good idea to take fulvic acid with foods since it counteracts and detoxifies the contaminants, such as the pesticides and the chemicals and all of that, which are found in our foods, and especially if they're not organic. Now, of course, also in this product, the fulvic acid product, we have lithothamnium calcareum, and this is a very mineral-rich red marine algae, and it grows off the cold Atlantic waters off the southwest coast of Ireland and the northwest coast of Iceland. And this red coral, it grows in a shell which is really rich in calcium and magnesium, and it too is extremely useful for detoxification. Now, of course, zeolite is renowned as a master detoxifier. It binds to heavy metals and toxins as well as supporting the gut. Now, in the clinical trials in humans, it shows a positive impact on the intestinal tract and influences that intestinal wall integrity. So we haven't got that leaky gut. So things aren't leaking and getting into our body and causing more inflammation and more free radicals and more oxidative stress. Now, the preclinical data is telling us that it also has a very positive effect on the gut microbiome. Now, interestingly, the role of zeolites has really been used in veterinary medicine for quite a long time, because there's evidence, very clear evidence, that zeolites improve the physical fitness of farm animals by removing the numerous harmful substances from their body. And of course, while most zeolites only detoxify the gut, the zeolite detox pack comes with 2 targeted zeolites for that whole body detox. So we can do the gut, but we can also get down to those toxicants that are stored at a cellular level. So Pure Body is sized to detoxify the gut. Pure Body Extra goes that step a little bit further with those nano-sized particles, and it reaches again at that cellular level. We've got over 300 published studies on PubMed on the beneficial properties of zeolites. And of course, this mineral has a lot of increasing attention because of its ability to trap those toxins and heavy metals and environmental pollutants. So folks, spring is not just a time for cleaning our houses inside and outside in our yards. We also need to take time to spring clean our bodies. Just think of all the people that you can help with detoxification. If you can figure out a way to share this presentation with them, do so. Really, really stress the importance of these younger people prior. Think about it. The EPA says, try not to consume any fish 5 years prior to conceiving. Let's detoxify these kids before they have these beautiful babies. So thanks for taking the time to be part of tonight's presentation. We're going to see you next time for our presentation on detoxifying another group of chemicals that are called what are they called? They're called OP pesticides, organophosphate pesticides. So good night, everyone, and thanks again for joining me tonight. Good night.